everyone. Thanks for joining in on this panel and discussion on deepfakes. My name is Arif, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alethea AI. I have with me a friend and collaborator and colleague in many ways, somebody who I've learned from as well, Mike, who's the founder of Ideas Market. And I think it'll be really prudent and wise also to get him to share a little bit more about how he sees the media landscape evolving in the beginning, because that will set some context for us in this conversation. I'll then, once he's done with the conversation, I'll then cover my focus area, which is really the synthetic media component, the deepfakes component, and then we'll open it up for discussions and hopefully have healthy discussions. We have quite a bit of time today, and the folks at Ethereal have been kind enough to give us a bit of room to discuss openly, because we are really at the frontier of many of the issues that are occurring in the media landscape. So there are more questions than answers, and I think the right mental models and frames to address these questions is something that both Mike and I have been trying to think of. So without further ado, I'll let Mike lead the initial part of the conversation. And I recommend if everyone's okay, you can either chat, drop me a chat box, a comment in the chat, so that I can take your questions as well throughout the conversation. And so, Mike, without further ado, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Arif. I will share my screen now. All right. Does everybody see that?
Is that the logo of your company, Mike?
Fortunately, no. I would like to invite you to imagine that Enron is still here. And if you're not familiar, if you weren't around back then, or if you're not an American, you might not know Enron is an extremely famously bad company, an energy company that actively harmed the citizens that it was supposed to serve in order to make a profit, of course. And once news of this broke out, everyone sold their stock, and their leaders, a couple of them, I think, went to jail, and they went out of business extremely quickly and explosively, and nobody was expecting it because they were this huge company. So I'd like to invite you to imagine that Enron is still here, and it's still doing its same bad things, and all you can really do is tweet about it. There's no investigation that's taking it down. All you can do is say, "Oh, Enron is terrible. I'm never trusting them again. Send tweet." And that's all the power that you have to change their operation. And your parents still think it's great. They're still buying Enron stock. Everything seems to be just fine. 30 years later, the same bad behavior is continuing. I invite you to imagine that, because that's exactly what we do with corporate media. Why is that the case? It's because there's no stock market for credibility. There's no system of accountability whereby trustworthiness, as determined by the public, can be registered. There's no mechanism whereby corporate media loses money if they fail to do what they tell you is the essential function of their business. There's no way to counteract their power in such a way. So, for example, you have this nice reporter lady who's rowing in a flooded town. There's been a hurricane. There's been a terrible flood. And oh my God, she's in a canoe. And oh wait, these guys are just walking through the frame because it's actually 2 inches of water. There's kind of no length to which corporate media won't go to mislead and deceive. And this is really a very common practice. So that's kind of a silly example. And then there are more serious examples. Just 2 days ago, CBS News was accused of faking footage of coronavirus testing in Michigan. This is just 2 days ago, very current. And then, of course, we have our friend Balaji saying that if you believe the New York Times, then you believe Epstein, legitimately killed himself and was not involved in any, serious, terrible plots. And more recently, of course, The New York Times saying on January 9th, there's no evidence that the virus is readily spread by humans, has not been tied to any deaths. And of course, health officials in China are watching it carefully. So this turned out to have extraordinarily high costs. If it was a mistake, it was an extremely careless and risky one. And if it was some kind of denial or collusion with the WHO, which was also denying it around that time, then that's something much worse. But either way, society paid a huge cost at not having an early start on coronavirus, as you can tell. So despite all these failures that never end, credibility continues. The New York Times is still huge. Fox News is still huge. CNN is still huge. Washington Post is still huge. All the signs of legitimacy are still there for the decision makers of our society, and that is decreasing somewhat. But credibility printer go burr, and that brings us to the problem of corporate media. Is exactly the problem of central banks. In the same way that central banks create money that's based on trust, that's not backed by anything, there's no accountability, and that power is used to exploit the public, media corporations do the same with narratives and credibility. We are expected simply to trust them based on their declaration that they are trustworthy. There's no accountability. There's no, fact-checking the fact-checkers on the same playing field that they're operating at. And they use their incredible power to exploit the public on a regular basis. Central banks, infinite fiat money. Corporate media, infinite fiat credibility. Credibility by declaration. We say this is the narrative, therefore it's the narrative. We say this is true, therefore it's true. Like a basket of fiat currencies, publishers with fiat credibility have value only with reference to one another. The euro and the dollar and the yen, none of them are backed by gold, but you can trade them against one another. They have a referential value. The corporate media cartel is like a floating basket of fiat currencies. So what incentives does this create? What does corporate media benefit from as a result? First, they make money from ads. First, views, so they make money from ads. So they want the audience to click, engage, and share, and the easiest way to get that behavior is through clickbait, outrage, and fear. That shouldn't be too surprising. There's been a lot of discussion on this before. Are you coming with me on this so far? I realize that you may not have a whole lot of ways to answer that question, but raise your hand and we'll pretend that I saw it. All right, cool. Second, control. They don't want an audience that will willingly, readily, easily change their mind when new evidence is presented, and they don't want you to question the official narrative. How do they achieve this? How do they create an audience that won't change its mind and won't question the official narrative? Well, they make changing your mind and questioning official narratives prohibitively embarrassing. The way they make changing your mind prohibitively embarrassing is that by inciting outrage, they inspire actions that are difficult to undo, public actions in particular, such as you yelling at your friends on Facebook, going on tirades, going to protests, buying bumper stickers, and basically making public commitments of your points of view and really staking something on it. Making questioning official narratives embarrassing. If you do that, they call you a conspiracy theorist. They remove any kind of institutional support or credibility. They use this great social cost to make changing your mind and questioning official narratives too embarrassing to do for a lot of people. Humans are memetically modified organisms. If you've heard the phrase manufactured consent, that was popularized by Noam Chomsky when describing the way the media assisted the government and military or industrial complex in persuading the American public that the first Gulf War, the first war in Iraq in the early 90s, was a good idea. There may not have been real reasons to do this. More recently, of course, the war in Iraq kind of had the same situation. The press, the media kind of encouraged it. If you remember a few months ago when America killed the Iranian leader, I'd already forgotten his name, on January 3rd, there were all these sort of warmongering articles in the media. The media manufactures the consent to do what the powers that be want them to do. And when you manufacture consent, you get people to believe something that isn't necessarily true. Well, then the people are going to want to defend that belief that you created. So there's a manufactured denial as well. As with the previous slide, if they make changing your minds embarrassing, there's sort of a manufactured inability to consider evidence the way a normal rational agent might be able to. So I just want to emphasize that even though it seems like everybody is stupid and everybody is crazy and stubborn and nobody can listen to facts or anything like that, that this state of confusion and stubbornness is manufactured. This has been done to people. People are naturally a lot smarter than we've been trained to be in the last several decades. When changing your mind is prohibitively embarrassing, conversation becomes warfare, and people become soldiers for a point of view. So to recap, we've said corporate media benefits from views, which they get from clickbait, outrage, entertainment, things like that, and controlling the narrative and controlling the audience. No questioning the legitimacy of the narrative, and no changing your mind and switching sides. If CNN doesn't want you to become a Fox News viewer. Third, they want to maintain the cartel. Recall that there's no system of accountability whereby trustworthiness, as determined by the public, can be registered. It doesn't matter if Gallup polls say that people trust the media less than ever. We still use it to convince grandma. We still use it to convince mom and dad. We still use it to convince each other. And we still celebrate when it covers crypto and Bitcoin and things like that. This means outrage, fear, and narrative control are low-risk, high-reward activities. Since there's no system of accountability, encouraging outrage and division, compelling attention with fear and clickbait, and reserving legitimacy for the loyal to the narrative are low-risk behaviors. There's not really anything the public can do to punish them for that. And high-reward, that's how they make their money. It's a pretty easy decision to make from a serving the stockholders point of view. And at the same time, good behavior is a high-risk, low-reward activity. If CNN covers Fox News viewers or conservatives with enough nuance and empathy, they might actually lose viewers. If they do a good job, they lose. So there's sort of a prisoner's dilemma in that the media corporations that start to do a good job sort of get eaten and devoured by those that more ruthlessly manipulate. So it's sort of a most ruthless manipulators win kind of game, and they're all in it together because that's the only way they can survive. So we have every expectation that corporate media will cause credibility inflation until fiat credibility is worthless. Like with central banks, the incentives are there for this behavior to continue and not change really under any circumstances as long as the incentives remain as they are. So in the same way that Bitcoin has created a permanent and unstoppable incentive for central banks and for economic policies to change, idea markets is intended to do the same for corporate media and credibility. Bitcoin makes money costly for everyone, not just for us, and free and cheap for central banks. Idea markets make credibility costly, not just costly for us, but free and cheap for the corporate media cartel. So with that said, I will hand it back over to Arif, who can probably give us a lot more frightening detail about the power of corporate media now that deepfake technology is allowed.
Mike, before you head off,
Sure.
before you transition, I suppose just a couple of questions. Obviously, some things I
Great, yeah, by all means. Yeah, sure.
Some I disagree.
Okay.
Maybe one of the things is, how do you account for genuine errors in media reporting versus actual intent to deceive? So if my mental models get updated as I go through reality, as I get more information, but I also have the pressure to report existing information as is true. This goes back to sort of the Rumsfeldian notion of the unknown unknowns that are not known before you launch a war, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you for that sort of error?
Idea Market uses markets to make credibility costly. So it's sort of like a stock market for the notion of credibility. And the power of that is the interpretation of credibility is open to the public. If the public believes that you lied, then the market is going to reflect that. And if the public believes that you were innocently mistaken, then the market is going to reflect that. So I and my product make no attempt to distinguish that because it's impossible. Instead, we provide a medium for the evidence and public perception to speak for itself, because that's where credibility ultimately needs to come from. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So let's say we take an edge case in society, and it takes time for that edge case to play out. So, for example, let's say the coronavirus, right? So,
yeah.
Reporting on the coronavirus initially from a large number of media outlets, I think they were trying to move away from the sensationalist narrative, but at the same time trying to protect existing mental models or frameworks that were embedded in the media structures. That time gap before something actually plays out and the consequences, that ability to forecast and have that perspicuity to look into the future, how do you account for that time gap? Because the reality is going to shift within that time. How does your framework account for that? Because I can be correct if you give me long enough time. You know, my ideas
Yes.
if I'm alive long enough, some of the radical ideas I might see might come to fruition. But in a reporting context, I imagine the people who said, I suppose the people who said that you will never see the government release UFO footage. Those people were wrong. So about this happened about 2-3 weeks ago, I think. The Pentagon released such footage. So I'm trying to understand and grapple with the time issue here. How do you think of that more?
Sure. Well, since our product is a market, it allows the public to make its own judgment as to where responsibility lies. And with the time issue, in the coronavirus example, there were Americans that I knew who've spent lots of time in China and were already, warning their circles of friends about the reality of this. And so if people in, pockets of populations that have access to this information get it in a convincing way long before the media do, that kind of demonstrates a failure on the media's part. The time issue is really only a valid excuse for as long as it's a time issue for everybody. If it starts to play out in clear enough terms that an average citizen can get good and important information and disseminate it before a media corporation can, that is a market signal about that corporation's credibility. Does that help? Does that clear that up somewhat?
Yeah, gives a frame that so when with the coronavirus in particular, I found myself as an example seeking original points of reference, either from Twitter, from the front lines, from doctors, from friends who had been in China, as opposed to official narrative, because I was pricing that in.
Absolutely.
The reality of pricing that into the idea that whether this virus is going to be harmful or not. And today there's a lot of disinformation. So I think you've left us with some very interesting and open questions about what's possible. I think it sets the context for me to now introduce I suppose what Jeff Bezos calls a complexifier, something that makes the situation even more complicated, complex. And that is the introduction of synthetic media. And it's within this context that we have to operate, because the frameworks that we have may or may not be able to withstand the existing pressures as technology improves. So I'll just share my screen here. Let me know if you can see it. Let's see if we can load up. So the central idea, I think, Mike, can you see it? I imagine if you can see it, the audience can see it as well.
Yes, I can see it. I have myself on mute, but yes, I can absolutely see it.
I think the issue here is, faces and voices can be cut, copied, and pasted easily and efficiently today in a way that has not yet been possible before. And this is primarily due to the advance of deep learning. So on the right, you'll see Jimmy Fallon and John Oliver swapped. On the left, you'll see CD from Binance and Jet Li in a martial arts flick that we did. The democratization of this technology itself, the ability to do this effortlessly without expensive CGI equipment, is going to create tremendous issues for us as a society to grapple with. So I'm going to just leave a framework here that I think is helpful for me, that helps me understand how I should think about this technology within the context of media freedoms today. So on the left, let's call it the control function in society, the order that is needed. And on the right, let us call that the freedom function in society that wants to push us towards innovation and creativity. On the extreme left, if you look at certain societies where satire is banned, synthetic media technology, the ability to take someone's face and voice, transpose it, is going to get largely immediately censored. And so in that framework, I like to ask myself a skeptical question, and this is a mental model for skepticism across the entire spectrum. In a censorship framework where media is relatively restricted or state narratives control, do we have the framework of a dictator, or do we have a benevolent dictator? And that is a question that is open to being asked and open to being answered as we look at the people who want to censor this technology. And then there are edge cases and use cases as we move further along to the right, where deepfake technology, the same thing that we saw, somebody's face being cut, copied, and pasted, is being used in pornographic use cases, where somebody's face is being taken without their permission, put into a pornographic image, and then circulated around. Obviously, this is a harmful edge case. But where do we draw the line if we use these edge cases to indicate regulation from the state? So that means we are inviting the state now to regulate the use of this technology. The third framework that I've seen come up is, let us now create coalitions where we get the media to regulate, or we get the participants in this ecosystem to decide what is true versus what is false. The fundamental challenge there is that this type of technology, synthetic media, may not necessarily fit with the existing models, as Mike has pointed out so eloquently. And then there are the radical libertarians who believe that you should democratize this technology to all and let creativity flourish and let us all wear flowers in our heads as we smoke weed in San Francisco. So I think amongst all of these frameworks, I find myself juggling the ideas, juggling the mental model as to which one should apply in which context. And there may be more, but this is sort of a simplified frame for me to try and understand where the problem is and how we move that frame and how we actually empower ourselves to navigate this complex situation. So the reason why this is happening today, and I'll just see if I can load this up, is because we're at a stage right now where, give me a second, let me just make sure that I can go back. Yeah. Okay. We're at the stage right now where I call it stage one, where one person can create one piece of convincing synthetic content. We're about to make the leap from stage one to stage two, where 1 million people can make 1 million pieces of convincing synthetic content. And from stage two, we will reach stage three, where one person can create 1 million pieces of convincing synthetic content. As we move along these stages, primarily driven by the ease and use of technology, we are going to look at the evolution of media, and it's going to unfold in a very lively way before all of us. there's a wonderful film I like to reference here called Congress, where Robin Wright decides to lend her face and voice and likeness out to a talent agency in a dystopian sort of future. And the talent agency uses that face and likeness and licenses it out to all sorts of films. Her digital identity is abstracted away, and she signs away the rights to her face and to her voice. We are increasingly getting to that point, and you'll see applications and examples of synthetic media technology in the celebrity domain, in the media and entertainment domain, but you'll also see it in the disinformation domain, where state actors and non-benevolent actors can use this technology to harm. So I think it's important just to have this framework specifically also for memes, which the crypto community is well known for. We're going to see a shift away from shorter form still image memes to highly realistic face swaps. And I'll encourage all of you to check the president. I won't often say this, but if you review President Trump's Twitter feed, you'd see a meme recently posted where he reshared a meme where President Obama's face was swapped into an advertisement. And he retweeted that out as context. So it was considered what is a cheap fake, which I think there will be a session later on by Catherine Harrison, who's also leading some very good initiatives in this domain. The opportunity here for a company is not just to solve, I think for Mike and his team, they're trying to look at the entire disinformation problem and trying to make lying expensive. I see an opportunity for companies to actually solve for the underlying digital rights management that this technology is going to enable. So there is an app today that I recommend all of you try or at least experiment with. And I don't know whether they are doing it legally or illegally, but essentially you can take a celebrity's face and swap it onto your own face without asking their permission or consent. This framework that we have gotten used to is a bit tricky because it does not put the individual at the center of the decision for something as primal and important as his or her face or voice. And this gray area is going to continuously expand as the technology use cases grow. So the digital rights management layer is something that we can look at, but we must look at it within the context again of how we are enabling the shift towards either more signal in society or more noise. And while there are no easy answers to this question, I go back again to the mental models that I presented in terms of are we moving society towards more freedom or more towards a control narrative? It's the context that deals with, it's this context where the blockchain can provide interesting solutions, right? So if you check out digital rights management and blockchain, you'll find many interesting approaches to trying to solve the allocation, attribution, monetization problem. And the blockchain does provide a verification layer for that. So there is an example out there today that does exist, but it's without the blockchain. And I like it because it's so simple, it's so clear, but it still does leave room for freedom and still does leave room for creativity. So if you go and have a look at Elon Musk's content, or if you type Elon Musk Deepfakes, you'll see a bunch of content that he has also shared that is satirical of is a parody of him, whether it's baby Elon, whether it's Elon as a rock. There are so many content pieces out there that have been created today based on his likeness and face. And it is a chaotic mess if you're trying to determine what is true and what is not. I like the idea that Twitter has implemented, which is the blue check mark, right? So if you look at the blue check mark, it is a very simple framework that tells me whether something has been validated by the person in charge of it. And the person putting that piece of content out is at the center of the decision, or someone he has delegated that decision to make. So these are some solutions out there that I think are interesting to start off with as a jumping point. Where Alethea is we're trying to build a digital rights permission layer that allows people to leverage synthetic media technology. And I think it is within this context that we can sort of begin and open up a conversation. So I'll just stop sharing my screen here, and I see that we are on time and we have a question. Okay, we have a comment. Thanks, Catherine. So I think we'll open it up to questions or comments, or a large part of this discussion, at least from the folks here, was that there were people would have a lot of questions given the newness of this. But I encourage all of you to ask any questions you have. Otherwise, I'll try and ask Mike a few questions as we go through this challenging trend. So, Mike, I think the first question I wanted to just think through was, when you think about synthetic media, one of the primary motivations that I had when I looked at this problem was, there's a really good show that I've seen, which is Man in the High Castle, which is an Amazon series based on the novel. And in that show, Nazi Germany has somehow in this alternate timeline, they control the United States. They happen to have won the World War, right? The Great War. Nazi Germany controls the eastern sides of the US, and the west coasts are controlled by the Japanese, the Nippon Empire, right? And it's within this frame that these strange images start to emerge because of the fascist control. All images in society are dictated and controlled by the political power structure. And there start to emerge some images of the Allies winning the war. And these images are so realistic. It shows Winston Churchill, it shows Roosevelt. They've actually won the war. There's a collapse of the statue, there's a collapse of of Berlin seen live. It's within this context that the regimes start to get very worried. So I liken that to where synthetic media can play a positive role in society, where you are going to have narratives that states, either fascist or not, cannot control, and where synthetic media comes in as a truth-telling multiplier that enables people to speak either truth to power or at least push the needle forward. I think the simplistic assessment sometimes is that all synthetic media is bad. Largely it is used for pornographic use cases. But if we step back and pull back, we can actually see that it is a framework to operate in very different societies, depending on how free a society is versus how controlled it is. So in your context, I suppose one of the things that I've been curious about is, have you found angles or storytelling tools that increase the ability to determine truth? Like in your experience, when you've looked at media or narratives or tools to increase the signal in society versus noise, what have these tools been for you as you've tried to navigate this ever-confusing time?
That's a very interesting question. I'll answer it from one angle first and then try to be more specific later. And that is, I really appreciate synthetic media's potential to liberate the imagination of positive futures. We're living in a world where, Black Mirror feels sort of prophetic. And if people can put forth images of progress and good things and how they could be, and make them interesting and compelling, and give the public something to look forward to, aspire to, hope for, believe in, sort of like Man in the High Castle, I think that could be a part of culture that we're very much missing. I've heard various journalists lament at America's sort of loss of heroes. We used to, throw parades for Neil Armstrong and things like that. And if Neil Armstrong were around now, we would be looking for his sex scandals and things like that and just trying to tear him down. So America used to have, I think, much more optimism, maybe not more reasons for optimism, but had more optimism, had more respect and appreciation for positive things, aspirations, and principles and virtues and heroism. And I think synthetic media could sort of bypass official gatekeepers in allowing the public to create that for ourselves, to show ourselves the future or even the present that we could have if incentive structures or powers that be were not so corrupt or were replaced or something like that. We can create our own visions, and I think that's a powerful tool. So in terms of discerning truth, it's difficult to say, but what I've found useful is separating, especially with crisis information, like in the coronavirus crisis and the economic crisis and all that. With crisis information, I've found it useful to separate information into 3 levels. The first is the institutional level: the New York Times, Fox News, WHO, the White House, etc. When institutions say something, it's usually either completely misleading or so obvious that it's not useful anymore. They sort of rubber stamp, certify the extremely obvious information, such as the WHO declaring a pandemic officially. I mean, come on, everybody knew about that for weeks and months beforehand. It was just a rubber stamp. So institutional is the first kind of information that I've found, a category of information I've found useful. The second I'm just calling credible or useful, and that comes from individuals whose judgment I respect and who have demonstrated themselves to not be beholden to institutional narratives. If they have contradicted institutions in the past or said things very early that institutions later certify. In the crypto industry, Balaji Srinivasan and his coverage of the coronavirus crisis has been a great example. Individuals who are credible and non-beholden. So that's Balaji, that's Ryan Selkis, who created a great coronavirus cheat sheet for a while there. John Stokes, the founder of theprepared.com. These are the kinds of people that I listen to before the institutions get it and take that information more seriously. And the third is exploratory or surprise reduction information. This is the kind of stuff that comes from every corner of the internet, including anonymous posters on 4chan, who every now and then actually really know something useful. So there's an ocean of BS out there coming from literally every source with no particular reason to believe it. And every now and then there really is a gem. And when you familiarize yourself with this wide variety of possibilities, things that individually you have no particular reason to believe, but collectively you have reason to expect there's something useful in it. If you familiarize yourself with this wide variety of possibilities, then you have a head start recognizing confirmatory evidence when it starts to pile up. And when things that sound crazy, like a global pandemic that shuts down the economy worldwide, when signs of that start to pile in, you don't have to spend a lot of time emotionally adjusting to that reality and practicing accepting it, because you've been used to it being a possibility for a while now because someone on 4chan, said blah, blah, blah. So I've found that framework helpful, these three kinds of information: institutional, credible individuals, and exploratory or surprise reduction. I hope that is helpful.
Okay. I think that framework is very helpful. It's in the so discovery of the individuals who tend to sometimes be correct when institutions fail us. That seems to be the slightly overarching narrative in the West today, at least, given that there is a confrontation with institutional failure that we're all dealing or grappling with, whether it's the financial system in '08 all the way now to the health situation that we're in. So I suppose the third one is of interest to me, which is the surprise edge use cases, because those are the most shocking to my mental models. And I suppose I've tried to ask myself the question as a relatively straight-laced Singaporean who happens to find himself in the West today. In the USA, it's the edge cases, it's when rumors turn out to be true. And those rumors tend to impact, are so consequential that they tend to impact an entire society's trajectory. So, for example, if we go back and we look at the evolution of the narrative of coronavirus, had the rumors, the initial early rumors that were coming out in Wuhan, had they been sense checked and attributed correctly, and the doctor who actually said that there were people dying of pneumonia and who was then immortalized in the Ethereum blockchain, had that been listened to and transposed or at least shared with the community, that may have ended up saving or at least sounding the alarm. It's the discovery of these rumors that I think requires people to be responsible truth seekers, but also at the same time, the cognitive demand on a person to do that is very significant, right? So journalists were the original curators and are the original curators, but the existing frameworks that they are trapped in themselves, what you pointed to, the business models, the headlines, the editorial agendas, it's those frustrations that I think can be very challenging to break out of. So as individuals, I suppose a key takeaway for me after listening to you, but also thinking about this issue a little bit, and I welcome all of you to connect with us at either, let me just put my email in, Arif at Alethea.ai, and then Mike, if you want to leave your details there, you can do that, because I've been told by John that we have a few minutes left. So I think if one of the core takeaways for me has been use the existing frameworks that we are equipped with for truth discovery. And at Alethea, what we are focused on is how synthetic media can be a critical part of the discovery as well. Whether it is through satire, parody, we are quite privileged in the West and in the US specifically to be able to articulate ideas that are considered fairly radical compared to other countries. So while Mike can be really harsh on the New York Times and all of the media publications, I will say that the editorial standards of the Times are far greater than some of the other newspapers I've read around the world.
Yeah,
right? So,
they're excellent. I'm extra hard on them because I hold them to a higher standard. So yes, there are absolutely worse offenders. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. But there is also, of course, the whole the spiel around the corporatization of media, which becomes very tricky. So with that, I think that's sort of the takeaway I wanted to leave the audience with. I don't think we had that many questions come in, but I'd welcome any questions privately as well. And if you'd like to use synthetic media technology for good or for humor or fun or to uplift spirits, please drop me an email. We have our APIs available. We're sort of sense checking each use case. And if you'd like to check out idea markets as well to bring markets to truth, I encourage all of you to check out Mike's site as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And yes, thanks to the Ethereal team for organizing.
Got it. Arif, Mike, thank you guys so much. This was a fascinating discussion, and I selfishly didn't want it to end, but we will keep chugging along here. Take care, and talk to you guys soon.
Thanks so much.